The Wizard and the Vampire. Written and read by Cody Goggin. Chapter 3. Fortunately for the young travelers, the road was very quiet this evening. Nova made sure to keep 2 or 3 steps ahead of the boys to keep Mason from trying to grab the necklace. Izyk didn't care which of them carried it. He was dealing with the horror of being out of Bragg without his Uncle Harold. Izyk had only left the town a few times with his uncle to go to Mygon, so traveling was completely new to him. The sun was beginning to rest, and the light was changing across the mountains and through the glades. It was beautiful for certain, but it did nothing to ease Izyk's mind. He found himself picking at the rip on his shirt until a piece of fabric had become wrapped around his finger. He twirled it various ways as they continued forward, until they reached the fork in the road. At this juncture, he accidentally ripped the fabric from his shirt. "Which way should we go?" asked Izyk. "Are you daft?" asked Nova. "Radiant City is that way." She pointed toward the road going left. Izyk knew that Mygon was the other way, and that it was far closer to them than the city. With darkness beginning to fall, he decided to voice his opinion. "Maybe we should sleep tonight in Mygon," he said. "You're just scared because you've never been to the city," said Mason. "Neither have you," said Izyk. "I'm not scared," said Mason. Izyk rolled his eyes. "It's starting to get dark. We don't want to travel at night, especially with the necklace." Izyk waited for one of the others to make the final decision, and it was Nova that decided first. "Izyk is right. We should sleep in Mygon. I have money for the inn," she said. Mason threw his arms in the air. "Where did you get money?" he asked. "Never mind, punks. The point is I've got it," said Nova. She took off down the path on the right, and Izyk was relieved to know they were heading someplace familiar, even if Mygon wasn't exactly a place he knew inside out. He hardly knew it at all, but he tried not to let that thought creep into his mind. At least it wasn't the road to Radiant City at night. "Have you been to Mygon?" Izyk asked Nova. "Of course I have. You guys act like everything is so far away. I run down here to spend the day sometimes." Izyk found that hard to believe. Even as much of an adventurer and free-minded individual Nova had become, he couldn't imagine her running from village to village on her own. But he supposed he might be wrong about that, too. "You've never talked about it before," he said. "You guys don't hang out with me anymore," she responded. Neither of the boys could respond to that. It had been long and complicated over the years, growing apart in school. Izyk wasn't sure it made sense at all. "I'm sorry," was all he said. She waved him off and continued walking. "We're certainly in a world of crap now. I'm not sure which one of you I ought to blame." "I was just thinking we should blame you," said Mason. Nova turned red in the ears and she glared at him. "How dare you?" "You're trouble. That's why they kicked you out of school," said Mason. Izyk felt that Mason was going too far, but he wasn't sure how to stop it. The comment clearly hurt Nova badly. She fought tears in her eyes, and Izyk wasn't sure he'd ever seen that before. Mason had enough sense to keep his mouth closed. "You don't know anything," she said. The 3 continued walking quietly for a while. Izyk stared at his feet as every step hit the ground. He kept count to keep himself entertained, until it wasn't interesting anymore. When he looked up, it was as if the simple gates of Mygon had snuck up on him. The city of Mygon was richer than Bragg, and it was noticeable right from the introduction. The walls were taller and made of sturdier bricks that looked like they might keep someone out if they had to. Izyk wasn't sure if that comforted him or unnerved him as they passed through to the main courtyard of the town. The sights and smells of the evening crowds and dinners from the tavern were filling Izyk's senses, and he suddenly realized he hadn't eaten. "Will there be food at the inn if we stay?" he asked. "Of course there will be." "Do you guys have any money to pay for it?" asked Nova. Izyk fell silent. He hadn't intended on leaving Bragg, or he would have grabbed the small sack of money he had saved from his bedroom. As it was, he was unable to pay for supper. Luckily, Mason offered to pay. "It's just barely enough," said Nova, and she scooped his money from Mason's hands. "We should stay at the place I've been before. I reckon that's safer." Izyk and Mason agreed. "Which inn is it?" asked Izyk. "The Pirate's Curse," she said with a smile. "It's not exactly fancy, but it's cheap." The way she said the name made Izyk instantly wonder if they should choose somewhere else to stay. But he chose to trust her judgment. She headed into town and through the bustling crowds of people leaving their jobs and heading home for the night. As the lanterns outside of the homes began to light up, they seemed to dance with the starlight, and something about it served to make Izyk feel good. It reminded him of being younger and doing smaller, sillier things with his friends. He was glad this whole thing had brought them together, but wished it had been under different circumstances. "This way," said Nova suddenly. She darted down a path as if she knew it just as well as the passages in Bragg. "We're here." "What do you mean?" asked Izyk, surprised. "You expect us to stay here?" said Mason. Nova held out her hands toward the shabbiest building in Mygon. Its bricks were peeling and breaking, and its door was merely a curtain draped across an opening that had gathered a puddle on the floor. "You've got to be joking," said Mason. He shot over to grab at the necklace, but Nova held it out of his reach. "We aren't staying here," he said. "This is the only place I know of," said Nova resolutely, and she headed inside without them. Izyk and Mason looked at each other to see what the other would do first before making any decisions. They both hesitated until Nova poked her head back out and scolded them. "Come on," she said. They both walked through the doorway and into the inn, where they emerged into a world unlike any Izyk had ever seen before. Directly in front of them, but about 20 feet ahead, was the bar, and it was terribly busy. The overweight woman tending tables for the evening was sweating as she rushed from one end of the room to another. Between the bar and the travelers were about 10 tables, and 7 of them were fully circled by people. Some were talking and sharing loud tales of bygone feats, while others were playing poker and gambling. Izyk took it all in as the smell of smoke and food filled his nose. "This is incredible," he said. "It's a dump," said Mason. Nova grabbed them both and pulled them to one of the few tables remaining empty. They sat down and tried to look like they belonged there, but somehow only Nova came across like she was comfortable. Izyk caught himself turning his eyes across the room to see what other people were there and what sort of things they were doing. Nova pulled his face forward to their table. "Don't look at anyone too closely. Some of them aren't people you want to mess with," she said. "Some of them?" asked Mason. Nova just glared at him. "Keep your heads down until somebody comes to serve us. We'll order food and a room," she said. "Actually, just order your food, and I'll handle the rest." "Whatever," said Mason. "What kind of food will they have?" asked Izyk. Nova scoffed at him. "Good Providence! Haven't you ever eaten somewhere other than home before?" "Yes, sometimes," replied Izyk. "It's not different, it just looks different." Nova stopped short as they were approached by the woman from the bar. She was heaving for breath and looked as if she might pass out. Still, she pulled out a notepad and turned to them, ready to take their orders. "What will it be, kids?" she asked. "My name's Tilda." Izyk shifted to try and convince himself that he looked like he fit in. He smiled at her and began. "Soup and bread would be fine. Water too," he said. Tilda smiled at him and turned her attention to Mason. He was grinning. "Soup and bread, and a beer, please." This time Tilda was not smiling. The woman looked at Mason, and he gave her his trademark poker face. The waitress eyed him up and down, and the smile slowly returned to her face. "No," she said. "I'll bring you water, too." "What is it for the girl, then?" Nova laughed, and Mason sunk deep into his chair. Izyk was just glad that Mason hadn't caused any extra trouble. "I'll have bread and water," said Nova. Tilda wrote it down and appeared to take a mental note of which table they were sitting at, before retreating to the bar and giving the note to the cook. Izyk felt his nerves settle back down, until he remembered that he and his friends all had weapons at their hips. The image of his two oldest friends in an unfamiliar place, with swords at the ready, was enough to nearly send him over the edge. "Do you think they noticed we have these?" he said, motioning toward the blade by his leg. "They won't if you don't draw any attention to it. Look around, Izyk. Everyone in here is carrying a weapon," said Nova. To Izyk's horror, it was true. He subtly glanced around, and every person he could see was carrying either a sword or a dagger at their hips. One of them even had a gun, and Izyk had only heard rumors about those. The iron caught his eye and held it. "Do you see that?" he asked his friends. Mason jumped up to look. "Whoa!" said Mason just before Nova pushed him back down. Izyk thought he saw the man with the gun look up, but the shadow across his face hid him well. "Are you crazy?" asked Nova. "You're going to get us killed. Have you heard a thing I've said, or are you just that stupid?" Mason flinched but sat back down when Izyk placed a hand on him. "I think that man is looking at us." Nova shushed them and stood up. Izyk felt his stomach lurch at not knowing what she was about to do. "I'm going to ask the maid some questions so that man can see that we're not paying too much attention to him. You two just try to behave," she said. Nova walked away, and Mason moved to engage Izyk in conversation. "What are we going to do?" he said. "We've got to get the necklace back and get away from Nova, or she's going to get us killed." "What are you talking about?" asked Izyk. "I'm telling you, she's become nothing but trouble," said Mason. Izyk wasn't buying the presentation. "She's the only reason we've made it this far, I think." Izyk wasn't convinced enough to defend his own words. But besides that, the man across the room had stood up and was making his way their direction. "He's coming over here," said Izyk through gritted teeth. As the light finally revealed the man with the gun, Izyk could see that his hair was blonde and clothes were black. He was probably around the same age as Izyk's Uncle Harold, but built leaner and meaner. His face was cut at the center of his eye, and it ran down his cheek in a perfectly straight line. The scar distorted his light beard from growing in properly. From where he walked, his blue eyes pierced through Izyk like daggers made of ice. The man stepped across the floor with heavy plodding footfalls and sat himself at the table with Izyk and Mason as if he had known them as friends. "Good evening," he said. Izyk gulped, and he thought he heard Mason make a noise like a high squeak, but neither of them managed to greet the man. He took no notice of their awestruck frames, but laid his gun on the table as if simply to let them see it. "Never seen one before, I bet," said the man. "Wanted to see it closer, I imagine." Izyk tried to look past the man to catch sight of Nova to signal for help, but he couldn't see where she'd gone. He glanced down at the gun, and as soon as he did, the man snatched it up and put it away. "They're dangerous," said the man. Izyk moved his head to signal that he understood. The man stood up slowly and swung his jacket around the gun to hide it from view completely. "I'll keep an eye out for you, kid. Make sure you don't get out of line. The man vanished into the shifting crowd, and Izyk managed to catch his breath just in time for Nova to sit back down at their table. She clearly hadn't seen what just happened. "The waitress said the food will be out soon," said Nova. "We're in room 10. Mason gaped at her, and Izyk struggled to speak. "I don't know if we should stay here," Izyk finally managed. "I just paid for the room, Izyk. Don't make me hurt you now," said Nova. Mason interjected. "You didn't see what just happened?" Izyk waved for Mason to be quiet in case the man was listening to them somehow. "We'll stay here at the inn, but we should take the food to our room and eat there," said Izyk. Nova relented. "You guys are going to get me killed," said Nova. "Here's the food. Let's go," said Izyk. After the food had been eaten, the two boys regaled Nova with the story of the man with the gun. She didn't speak at first, and Izyk was afraid she was going to be angry with them. "We didn't look at him again after you stood up. I swear," said Izyk. "I know we shouldn't have looked the first time, but I had just never seen an actual gun before." "I didn't even think they were real," said Mason. Nova flipped over on the bed away from where the boys lay on the floor. She said nothing. "What are we going to do? Do you think he'll come after us?" asked Izyk. "No," said Nova. "We don't have anything he could want." Mason jumped up out of his blanket. "Are you mad? We have the necklace!" Nova faced them again and pulled the talisman out for them to see. "That's true, but he doesn't know we have it. To him, we're just a few dumb kids. I doubt he's even thought about you again since he left your table." "Well, I know that's not true," said Mason. "He's right there." His finger was outstretched towards the window of their room, and sure enough, the man was standing down in the road between the fog. Nova jumped from the bed and pulled the curtains shut. "Do you think he saw me?" asked Mason. "Of course he saw you," shouted Nova. "What's worse is we don't know what he was doing down there. Is he following us?" asked Izyk. Nova rolled her eyes so hard that Izyk thought they might fall out of her head. "Of course he is." "Do you think he came all the way from Bragg?" asked Mason. "Do you think he knows we have the necklace somehow?" The draft in the room suddenly became apparent in a way that it hadn't been previously. The room was cold. Izyk pulled his blanket to his chin, but it served nothing to shake the uneasiness that had spread between them all. "Do we have a plan for tomorrow?" he asked. "Leave Mygon as fast as possible and head for Radiant City," said Nova as if it were a simple task. "That's our only option." Izyk sighed and rolled over. After several minutes of listening for any sounds outside the window, he drifted off into a restless sleep.